Well, good morning, good morning. If this is your first time at Stone Creek, a massive warm welcome. And we're glad that you joined us. We're just started last week, we started a brand new series on the book of Daniel. And Pastor Ricky did a great job opening that up for us last week and talking about our challenge to live in Babylon without Babylon living in us. How many people repeated that to themselves this week? You know you did. And so I'm jumping into chapter 2 today. If you've got your Bibles, you want to open up at Daniel chapter 2. And I've entitled the message this morning this, Caught in the Middle. Caught in the middle. I don't know whether in life you've ever been in a season where you just get caught in the middle of something you did not expect. You're wanting to push forward into a new reality, but the place that you are is completely different to what you expected. That's what happens in Daniel chapter 2. I know I've been married for 17 years, and over the course of those 17 years, we have moved home around about 11 or 12 times. You know, you get over 10, you lose count. 11 or 12 times. And I know what it's like, you know, when you're preparing to move, and you've got to pack up your stuff, but you're not quite ready to move into the new house. And there's a transition space that you live in maybe for a few weeks or a few months where you're just living and existing. You've got boxes all piled all around your house and you've got stuff that you put away, and then what happens, you start looking for the stuff that you've packed away and that you need. And so you start unpacking the stuff you've packed so that you can use it while you're still living in the in-between space. And Daniel chapter 2 is the story of the in-between space, where Daniel gets parachuted into a context and into a conversation and into a situation that he didn't know was coming, and now he's caught in the middle. And here's what I've discovered about life. I don't know whether you are. The majority of life, the time that we spend, is spent in the middle. We've not quite become all that we should be, but we're certainly not what we were. We're actually in the middle. We got married, and it's exciting to get married. And you've got all these hopes, and you've got all these ambitions about you being that old couple that have been married for 20 or 30 years. And you're excited for what it could be, but you know, there's a middle where it gets really real. You didn't realize you chewed loud before you got married. You didn't realize you grind your teeth before you got married. Because you're caught in the middle. And you're trying to create something amazing. But that happens in the middle ground. You have dreams and ambitions about having children. Oh, we want to have kids. It's going to be amazing. Gonna be amazing. They're going to grow up. They're going to change the world. They're going to be such a blessing. The Bible tells us that children are a blessing from God. And then they hit their teenage years. And you find yourself caught in the middle. I've got faith to believe they can become something. But right now, God, I want to kill them. Because I'm caught in the middle. I started that new job. Oh, it's going to be amazing. It's going to change my life. There's going to be opportunities, there's going to be this, that, and the other. It's going to be amazing. And then you find yourself caught in the middle, being asked to do things you don't want to do. This is not what I signed up for. What do you do in the middle? And I love it because Daniel shows us, in the midst of a Babylonian culture and context, how to navigate the middle without compromising who you are. And the story of Daniel and his three friends, the Hebrew boys in a Babylonian context, is a story of what it takes not to fit in, but to stand out. And here's the thing, you can spend your whole life trying to fit in. God has not called us to fit in. He's called us to stand out. I remember at 17 years old, I became a Christian. And let's just say, when I became a Christian at 17, I was in the middle of a mess. And God began to piece my life together at 17 years old. I remember the first job that I got was at Hilton Hotel in Dartford, Kent, in England. And I had the prestigious position of being the conference porter, which meant what? I moved a lot of tables and chairs. That's what that meant. And I'm trying to figure out what life looks like now, because I know how to live as a Babylonian, but I don't know how to live as a follower of Jesus. And as I went into that context, into my workplace, all the temptations of everything I'd lived in before I became a Christ follower was still there and still present. And I had to resist and fight the urge to do what I'd already done and always done, because God now had set me up for something different. He called me to be a follower of Him, and I took that seriously. I said no to some things. I said no to some offers. And you know what happened in that workplace? They ridiculed me. They'd laugh when I walked into a room and they'd say, here's that crazy Christian. Because you know what it's like when you first get saved. I think everyone should hear about Jesus. I would go up to the room. I didn't smoke, but I would go up to the smoking room at my workplace to sit in there and talk to everybody about Jesus while they smoked. You know, a lot of people gave up smoking that year, not because they didn't want to smoke, because they didn't want to listen to a crazy Christian while they were having their cigarette on their break. And they would laugh at me. I remember going on a missions trip to Ireland in my year of working in that place, and they laughed at me and they asked me, what are you doing? Why are you preaching on the streets about Jesus? And they would laugh. I worked in that place for 12 months, and here's what happened. One by one, they would all come to me privately and say, tell me more about the Jesus that you're talking about. Because when you stand out, you feel like you're going to be ostracized. But actually, it's what people are looking for. That they're looking for something different. And so if you're in here and you're a college kid in here today, don't just fit in and go with the flow. Choose to stand out and stand up and not compromise your morals just because the pressure is there to fit in. And Daniel shows us what it's like to stand out. We know as the story unfolds, we know that Daniel rises to prominence in Babylon because of his difference. He had a different spirit. He had a different way that he lived. And as much as Babylon applied the pressure for him to change his language, for him to adapt to their literature and lifestyle, he stood for God. And when you stand for God, you know you don't stand on your own. There might be times where you feel like you're on your own. But I pray that God would open your eyes to see angels' armies who are standing with you as you take a stand for Jesus in whatever context you find yourself in. And so as Daniel is living in this land and he's dealing with the complexities of all that he has before him, we arrive at chapter 2 and he finds himself in the middle of a situation. It says this in verse 1. It says, in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, he had dreams. His mind was troubled, and he could not sleep. So the king summoned the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, the astrologers, to tell him what he had dreamed. And when they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, I have a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means. As he begins to talk to these wise counselors that he's gathered, he asks them to interpret his dream, but not just to interpret his dream. First, before they can interpret his dream, he asks them to tell him his dream. Now, to be speaking to someone and for them to tell you they've had a dream and tell you what the dream is one thing. For someone to ask you, hey, I've had a dream, and I want you to tell me what the dream was before I tell you. And then I want you to give me the interpretation of that dream. Never in a biblical context has this happened before. We know that Joseph had been the interpreter of dreams. We read about how he interpreted the dreams in the prison. We read how he interpreted Pharaoh's dreams. But we have never seen a dream that is explained by the person who's about to interpret it. And all these wise people, all these astrologers, and all these magicians and all these sorcerers, they gather together and say, this is not possible. It's not possible. Like it's not going to happen. And the Bible tells us that Nebuchadnezzar is so troubled by the dream. And he's so frustrated by their response that here's what he says. He says, well, if you can't do it, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to chop you up. Think about the vivid picture that these sorcerers, I'm going to chop you up into little pieces. And he gets so frustrated that he says, in fact, kill everyone. All the wise people that we've gathered in this Babylonian empire, kill them all. And here's where Daniel finds himself. He wasn't even in the meeting, but now he's got an edict for his head and his life. And it tells us that the counselor comes in and he gathers the wise men together and he tells Daniel what's happened. I don't know whether you've ever been in a context like that, where a decision was made in your workplace and you weren't even in the room, but now you've got to deal with the ramifications of it. Am I preaching to anyone this morning? You've got to deal with the ramifications of it, and you find yourself in the middle. What do you do when there's a knock at your door? And you were living life and living for God 1 minute, and the next minute, here comes some news that completely takes you by surprise. That, hey, you're about to die, and you won't even know why, because you weren't a part of the conversation. That Daniel finds himself caught in the middle. Caught in the middle. And what do you do in that place? Where you get the phone call, where you get the letter, when you get the news, when you get the text, when you're faced with all kinds of scenarios and situations. And now you've got to figure out, I'm caught in the middle, and what do I do? Where's my reference point? How do I work this? Now here's what I love. I love to travel to different places. Anybody else? I love to travel. I love seeing the world. Actually, I lie. I like arriving at destinations. I don't like traveling to those places. I'm telling you now, you can feel like you are a Christian filled with the Spirit and have the fruits of the Spirit evidenced in your life. Let me see how you do in an airport. Let me see how you do when they're shouting at you in the cattle line as they're making you line up to go through security. And as they're shouting to take your stuff out. Anyone else panic in those moments? Like you're trying to get your stuff out and they're shouting at you. And you're like, will you just shut up and let me get my stuff out and get through this gate? They're shouting at you. I don't know about you, but every single time I walk through security at the airport, and you know they've got those new security measures now where you go in and you stand there with your hands up. There's even a picture in front of you, and you're stood there as they scan you. It's like, it goes around you. Every single time I go through them, I've emptied all my pockets, I've done everything, and I walk through, and my wife always laughs because they always say, sir, do you mind stepping to the side? We're going to pat you down. And there they go. They start your pockets. They do the whole thing, up, down, back, forward. And then, yeah, you can go. Every single time. I don't know whether I look funny or I don't know what the deal is. It's stressful. I don't know. When you get to the gate and you're waiting for your plane to board, waiting to board your plane, and they start calling out all the different groups. And you know, you do realize that the plane can't leave until everybody gets on it, right? But then we line up, we get in line and wait in line. Like there's a race to get to your seat. Like it's frustrating, isn't it? You find yourself going along with it. You find yourself, hey, come on, let's get our stuff. Let's get in this line right now. You do know the plane can't leave until everyone's been boarded who needs to be boarded. And then you fight with people over putting your luggage above head, right? And if you get to your seat and someone dare have put their luggage above your seat, World War III is about to kick off right now. You start praying in tongues and believing for patience, love, joy, peace, patience. It's stressful. It's stressful. See, I like starting a journey. I like booking my tickets. I like putting my feet in the sand when I arrive at my destination and swimming in the pool and looking at the glorious sunshine. I love the end, but the middle sucks. The middle sucks every bit of enjoyment out of the process. It's in the middle that you think, why on earth would I want to travel again? Why on earth? And then if you haven't, by some lack of planning, if you haven't already booked your seat and your seat's been assigned to you when you walk on that plane, you better hope and pray that they don't sit you where? In the middle. I can sit at the side of the plane and I can look at the beauty of God's creation. Or I can sit on the aisle with that extra space and I route to the bathroom really quickly. But if you sit me in the middle, have you ever sat in the middle on a plane? Think about this. How confusing is it? Which is your armrest? Which is your armrest? When you're sat in the middle, where do you put your arms? Because that person next to you has already taken that one and the person's taking that one and you end up sitting in the middle like this. Sat in the middle, frustrated, thinking I am never not assigning my seat to myself ever again because I don't want to sit in the middle. And then you get that crying kid next to you, usually your own. And you say to the stewardess, can you move me away from this kid? Can I sit somewhere else? Because the middle's tough. And Daniel finds himself in the middle. That everything's gone wrong. I've been transplanted from my home into a foreign land. And I'm trying my best to be a positive influence in the place that God's put me. But all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the king has a dream. And he has unreasonable requests about how the dream's going to be interpreted. And because somebody else couldn't answer, I find my head now on the chopping block. This is not fair. And what does Daniel do when he's in the middle? Here are three things that Daniel does. The first thing he does is he asks for time. When the news comes that he's about to die, he asks for time. It says this in verse 14. It says, when Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him, listen to this, with wisdom and tact. Oh, when you are in the middle, that's when you really need wisdom and tact. Wisdom, God, show me what I should do in this situation. And tact, I love tact. Tact means this. It means to have sensitivity when dealing with a difficult situation. Wow. Wisdom and tact. He says he asks the king's officer, why did the king issue such a harsh decree? Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel, and at this, Daniel went to the king and he asked for time so that he might interpret the dream. One of the best things you can do when you're caught in the middle is resist the temptation to rush. And if you think about it, it's completely counter to how you would feel and how you do feel in the middle. Because impending doom is coming for Daniel. And what does he ask for? Time. Time. Some of the worst decisions I have ever made in my life were rushed decisions. When I get some news, when I hear something and emotions rise, and you want to make a decision straight away, one of the wisest things you could ever do, if it's at all possible, is ask for time. If there's a big decision that needs to be made in your business, in your life, in your family, do all you can to garner some time to reflect, some time not to be reactionary or instinctual. And if you're an instinctual person or a leader, that's tough. To discipline yourself, not to just make a decision straight away, but to ask for time. Daniel walks before the king, the pressure, and he says, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to interpret that dream. But give me some time. Give me some time. In order for God to do a work in us that is long-lasting, it needs time. I made a decision to follow Jesus at 17 years old. I'm 40 years old today. And I'm still surprised by how stupid I am. And I think, God, it's been such a long time, but nothing good is accomplished quickly. It takes time. And so if you can ask for it, Proverbs tells us this: it is better not to be hasty and miss the way. We can miss God's way when we rush. And here's what Daniel does. He says, I'm going to resist the temptation to rush, and I'm going to take some time. I'm going to take some time. And it requires conviction. It requires wisdom. It requires tact to try and just take some time. So here's what I encourage you to do. If you've got something coming up and you've got to make a decision, why don't you carve out some time? Get away by yourself, you and God, and take some time to look deep and to look up. Because you don't want just another snap decision. When you're in the middle, you need God's solution, not your best plan. God's solution. And so ask for some time. The second thing that Daniel does when he's in the middle is he asks for help. He asks for help. It tells us this in verse 17. It says, then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He urged them, listen to this, he urged them to plead for mercy from God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Here's what Daniel does. He says, King, give me some time. And the very next decision he makes is to ask his friends to pray with him. Oh, the blessing of praying friends. If you could get some, not just friends in your life, but some praying friends who, when you're caught in the middle and life throws what it has at you, you can say, pray with me. That I'm not just taking time on my own, but I'm inviting somebody else in. And I'm saying, let's seek God and pray together. The best thing you can do when you're caught in the middle is call a prayer meeting. Here's the most influential man in that day, Nebuchadnezzar, speaking out murderous threats. And what do Daniel and his friends do? They appeal to a higher authority. And they say it's not about what Nebuchadnezzar says that counts. It's about the King of all creation. And if we can call a prayer meeting together, I don't know about you, I love being part of a praying church. Here's the most influential meeting in this community every week, the prayer meeting. I know it doesn't feel like it sometimes. I know you want to be sat with the head of state, and I know you want to be sat with the president of this company and that company, and I know you want to be sat with the head of services for this and for that, but the most influential meeting you can ever enter is not a high-powered board meeting. It's the prayer room where you say, come on friends, let's seek God's plan and purpose for our lives. And I tell you, there's no prayer meeting quite like a prayer meeting where you're desperate. I know you feel like you're desperate, but Daniel and his 3 Hebrew friends, they were desperate. Come on, if God doesn't show up, it's not going to work out well for us. And he calls his friends together and he asks for help. The third thing he does is this, is he asks for heavenly revelation. Heavenly revelation. It's in the middle where you don't just need best practice. You need heavenly revelation. You need to know, God, order my steps and let me know when the words come out of my mouth, let you speak. You know, that's a little bit like the life of a preacher, right? That you prepare what you need to prepare, but here's the prayer of a preacher. God, you better speak. God, you better speak. And you realize the pressure, you know, when you're preaching week in, week out like Pastor Ricky does. I know what that pressure's like. To prepare a 35-minute sermon and for everyone to scrutinize and judge 35 minutes like it's the totality of everything you want to say in those 35. It's 35 minutes, guys. 35 minutes. But here's what we need. Not just words, not just scriptures read. heavenly revelation. That God, you could open heaven in a moment and you could reveal something through the scriptures and the text. That in my dreams that you could reveal something. That God, as I open the scriptures for myself and as I seek you and as I pray and as I invite my friends in, that God, you could reveal the mysteries of heaven to someone like me. And that's what God wants to do for each and every one of us. Heavenly revelation. It says this in chapter 2 verse 19. It says, during the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven and said, praise be the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. Listen to this. He changes times and seasons. Do you believe in a God who can change times and seasons? It says he goes further. He says he disposes kings and he raises others up. He gives wisdom to the wise, knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness and what light dwells in with him. I thank you and praise you, God of my ancestors, that you have given me wisdom and power, and you have made known to me what he asked of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king. Going further, it says this in verse 26. The king asked Daniel, are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it? And Daniel replied, no wise man, enchanter, musician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. My question for you today is, do you believe that there's a God in heaven who reveals mysteries? That when you're caught in the middle and you don't know which way to turn, there's a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. There's a God who is powerful, and there's a God who can give wisdom so that you will know what you need to do. So he asks heaven, speak. Maybe this week for some of us, we need to say, heaven, will you speak? God, would you reveal mysteries to me? As I look forward and as I've got decisions to make about the future, God, I pray that you would reveal mysteries to me. Do you have that kind of confidence? That the God of heaven would want to reveal mysteries to you? I think that's what rules us out sometimes, of hearing from heaven as we want to. Because we don't quite believe that God would be interested in showing his mysterious plan and purpose to us. It's not that we doubt that God can do it, it's that we doubt ourselves. But when you're in the middle, you've got to push past all that self-doubt. And you've got to run into the place of prayer with your friends. And you've got to say, heaven, would you speak? Anyone need heaven to speak? That the revealer of mysteries would speak and would show us what we need to do. Worship team, if you want to come. Here's what Daniel does. He walks back into the king's presence and he says, I've seen the dream and I've got the interpretation. He says, here's what happened in your dream, Nebuchadnezzar. In your dream, you saw a statue. And this statue had a head of gold. And then you saw this statue that had a breastplate of silver. It had a waist of bronze. And it had legs of iron. And it had feet with clay mixed with iron. That's the dream that you saw, Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar can't quite believe that this is what God has done. He's revealed the mystery. And he's making it known. And then Daniel says, here's what the dream means. Because it's not just about having the dream. It's about knowing what to do with the dream. And for some of us, you've got a God dream, but you haven't got a clue what to do next. And that's where you still need the God of heaven to keep revealing mysteries, that he would tell you what step is the next step. What step is the next step? You can have the dream, but you've got to have the plan to execute the dream. And here's what he does. He says, I've seen this statue and here's what it means. There are 4 great kingdoms, Nebuchadnezzar. And you are the head of gold. You are the creme de la creme. You are the head of gold. But after you will come other kingdoms. This is a prophetic declaration from Daniel. of the kingdoms that would come in this world. We know that he talks about the Babylonian kingdom, the head of gold. The kingdom of silver represents the Medo-Persian kingdom that will come after. We know the Greek kingdom was the bronze stomach, and the legs of iron was Rome. And some scholars think that the fulfillment of this great picture that Daniel sees was when Christ came. Because he didn't just see the statue with all these kingdoms, he also saw a rock, who is Jesus. And what happens in the vision is that the rock comes and smashes the empires of man to pieces. And his great mountain grows throughout all the earth. Actually, when we think about the vision that he sees, we see that it is in reference to all of those kingdoms. But also in the book of Revelation, it tells us that the Antichrist will lead what looks like a reincarnation of Rome. That the iron and the clay will be mixed together. And here's the thing. Daniel was caught in the middle. He was caught in the middle of a dream that he needed to interpret. He was caught in the middle of Babylon. You know what? We're caught in the middle too. We're caught in the middle because he's been. But he's coming back. See, we're in the middle right now. He's been. And he was birthed into life in the form of an infant. And he would grow. And he would show a new way to live. And he would establish a new kingdom. But he's also coming back. And when he comes back, he crushes all the empires of men. Because the truth is this, the image of iron, the feet, and the clay, it's fragile. Because that's what the empires of men are. They're fragile. But there is a rock who's coming back, who will make all things right. And right now in the middle, here's what we do. We take the time to seek him. We devote ourselves to being people of prayer and his presence. And we ask God, until you come back, would you still reveal mysteries to us, your church, your people, so that your kingdom could be shined and could be shown in this world. That's our job in the middle. In the middle. Why don't you stand to your feet? We're going to finish in just a second. The song that we sung just before we jumped into the message today, Waymaker. As we declare that's who he is, it also causes us to look back to the God who did make a way. When you think about Israel, 400 years in captivity in Egypt, and God frees them, and they arrive at a place where they're caught in the middle. Egypt behind them and still in them. And a future before them. And here's what we know. We know that God is the God who can send a wind and who can reveal a path, because he is the revealer of mysteries. That when they didn't see a path forward, God could create one for them. And for some of you, you do not see a way forward, but there's a wind that's taking place. And here's what happens with the wind. The wind does not blow back the sea so they can see it with their natural eye. If you read the text, it tells us that it's in the night, it's in the darkness that the wind comes and blows back the sea. In other words, God was working, but they couldn't see it with their natural eye. It wasn't until the sun came up and they saw what God had done. And it just might be right now you're in the darkest of night. But let me tell you, don't trust what you can see. If you will lean in, you can hear the breath of God blowing away, making a way through. And here's the beautiful thing about that text. It doesn't tell us that they walk through on wet ground, because that's what you'd assume. If he's blown back the sea, you would assume that it's wet, muddy, boggy ground. It says they walk through on dry ground, because the God that we serve doesn't want the filth of your past and what you've walked through to be carried forward into your future. And so here's where we are. We are in the middle, and we're believing that God is working. But here's the truth, and this is where we'll finish. That God does not make a way for Israel because they've worked hard. God doesn't make a way for Israel through the sea because they've performed really well and deserve His favor. If you go right back to the call of Abraham, of Moses, he says, I have heard the cry of my people. God makes a way when He hears His people cry. And so if you need a way made, if you need God to do something amazing, here's what I want you to grasp this morning. It comes from your cry. Not your performance, not if you've had a good week or a bad week, not if Babylon's got in you a little bit this week and you feel like you need to get back to basics and what God's done. God responds to the cry of His people. And so come on, as we sing this song today, we're not just singing a song, we're not just declaring truth, we are crying out to God, the God who moves mountains, the God who levels mountains and makes roads through there, the God who takes a sea and blows it out of the way so His people can walk through in victory with their heads held high, knowing that their enemies are swallowed up behind them. Sin and death lost in the water because I'm living in freedom because of what He's done. So God, we thank You that You are the rock, that God, You make all things right. And we ask today that You would hear the cry of Your people as we sing this song and declare Your name, that God, You would do what only You can do. And we ask it in Your precious name, in Jesus' name. Amen. Come on, let's worship together.